What's going on, guys? Jesse here with MFC Offroad. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of MFC Garage on YouTube. Today we're actually going to be doing another 2-inch lift install where we thought, hey, let's knock out 2 birds with 1 stone and address every frequently asked question that we get for the 2-inch lift installation. You're going to see as we complete this installation the front thoroughly covered as well as the rear thoroughly covered. We're going to cover in depth all of the hardware as well as every lift component that is included in the kit. This way you know that after installation, all of your questions have been answered. As always, everyone, make sure you comment, like, and subscribe. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop us a message. And thank you again for supporting MFC Offroad.
In the video that we just presented to you, we showed you using our quick jacks to position underneath all the pinch welds. If you don't have a quick jack system like we do, if you have jack stands and a regular floor jack, totally fine. You just want to make sure you get underneath the pinch weld and position it correctly. Now, we do have it positioned so that there's a little bit of weight on the wheels, so we can still take all the lug nuts off so the wheel isn't free spin. Got a breaker bar. You want to use a 19mm socket, and if you have wheel locks, make sure you use the wheel lock. Never use an impact gun with a wheel lock. You want to do everything nice and neat and take your precautions because you do not want to strip that out. So we're going to remove these wheels, rear wheels, all wheels, lift the baby up, and get started. Now that we got the tire off, you can see all the suspension pretty much right in front of you. You got your ABS speed sensor wire right here that we'll be using our relocation bracket. You have your actual brake line hose right here that we'll be using our relocation bracket. Since the knuckle gets pushed down, this mount point for all of these needs to go down with it. You don't want to keep this mounted to the factory because when it's mounted to the factory, it's got less flex in this position, so there's a higher chance of the hose becoming dislodged when tire goes left or right, or actually breaking. And never use a zip tie with this as well. We're going to also remove the factory bolt that's in the back, and I'll go over those specs with you in a second. Alright, so I'm using an open-ended 12.11mm socket. Factory bolt is a 6-lobe design, so a 12-point socket fits it perfectly. You want to use an 11mm for that. And then for the nut on the other side, that is also going to be an 18mm. So put the 18mm on that side, 11mm on this side, and we're going to impact it off and have this set on the negative setting so it doesn't spin. Factory bolt, factory nut. We're going to discard that because with the MFC kit we give you OEM hardware to replace it. So the OEM hardware that we give you, that'll be used to retighten that. Now, if you look at the bottom of the strut, some of it sticks out beyond the actual knuckle. And a common question we always get is, if you move the knuckle down, is there still enough strut left in the knuckle to be able to be driven safely? Simple answer is yes. You're going to be removing a little bit of clamping force because some of the strut is not going to be still in there, but there's still plenty of clamping force directed around the strut to hold it in there. So we have a brake line grommet and the ABS line grommet. We're going to take this off for the ABS line, follow it to the top, and also take the one off at the top, flip it, and have it pointing down. With this, we're going to remove this, and then I'll show you the next step. As you can see, we flipped this connection. It was long part pointing up, now we flipped it to be long part pointing down. You got your factory brake grommet right here. Just going to press it out of the way, out of the hole, just like so, and pull it out, just like so. So now, you got your bolt out of the shark fin tab in the back. So this is free spinning, even though there's still a little force in the knuckle. This is the best way to do it. There's no hammering of the knuckle like it used to be, or bottle jack up against this, pushing against the knuckle. This simple tool makes the installation very simple. So what we're going to do, there's a little gap right here and a little gap right here. All we're going to do is take this heavy-duty flathead screwdriver, put it in, and push down. Push down, and then just find a way to get a little bit more leverage, different angles, whatever you got to do, just like so. The knuckle's going to want to slide back up, but if you can get it to a point where you can start working to fit one spacer into this location, you're golden. All of your MFC spacers have a 1/4 inch Allen key socket. So what we're going to do is spin this out and spin this out as well. This will be laid at the top, just like so. And we're going to do everything finger tight real quick. Now, take note that you want to make sure that the wording is parallel with this plane, because the way that this is supposed to sit is parallel to this line. Once again, finger tight. I'm just going to get it started with the tool. You want to have just enough tension on it so you can position it directly underneath the seat of the brake line tab that is welded to the strut. You can actually twist it like this with the socket tool inserted into the bolt. You want to do even amounts so that the gap that is seen between these two halves is equal. So this gap is necessary. If these were 100% circles, they would actually clamp against each other and be free moving on this strut. With a gap here, it allows it to be clamped to the strut and not. So now we have one installed. Well, you're probably saying, how the hell do you get the second one installed? I'll show you the simple solution to that as well. Remember this tool? You still have a gap right here. So, just gonna keep going in, creating that gap. Give there enough space to slide this second one in. Still need a little bit more. Sometimes if you turn this on its side, you get a little bit more of a way to slide it in. Okay, so now you got it slid in, but it's not even with this one. So, there was that technique I showed you before, where if you put these in to this piece, you can still slide this, just like so. Now it's slid into place. Everything matches, and you can put your second half on. Use the same technique as I showed you before. Use your fingers, start it off, or if you want, just go right to the tool. Even amount of force on both sides. One ugga-dugga on these small little impacts is perfect. Although the instructions say you want to torque it, you really don't need to. One ugga-dugga is perfect. Now you have your spacers mounted to your strut. The knuckle is relocated down, and if you feel down below, you still have roughly 2 inches of strut inside the knuckle, which is perfect. Now I'm going to install the relocation brackets for both your brake line and your ABS speed sensor line. Brake line, have it match just like this, so that the actual brake line can still be removed if you have to do any maintenance, or if you decide to switch to the MFC Offroad stainless steel brake lines. Get it started. I'm very particular in making sure everything looks neat, so I like to make sure that this is perpendicular with the ground, and then what we'll do is we'll just slide this right in as soon as we can. For the hardware, on this and this, you've got a 15mm hex head bolt and a 15mm nut on the back side. 15mm on this, and then open-ended so you could easily reach behind. You want to get it tight enough just so enough of the threads from this bolt lock themselves into the nylon portion of the nylon lock nut that's on the back side. Same thing will be done on this side. Common question people always ask with a washer, and it's funny that it's a trollable comment, but washers do have specific size to them. There's a beveled side and a sharp side. Bevel side is always facing out. You never want to look at the sharp side. It's just an ugly look. So, I'm glad we cleared that up. That elephant in the room is no longer there. Get it started by hand. Finger tight. Make sure it's positioned correctly. Again, make sure you get enough threads into the nylon. You can feel with your thumb or any other finger behind there. Now, you can take your ABS speed sensor line, position it correctly where it's supposed to be in relation to the knuckle after it drops down into this. Same thing with your brake line. You want to put it basically in there like that and just slowly work its way in there. These things pretty much get seized onto these hoses, so it's a pain in the ass sometimes to push it on, but once it gets locked in, it's going nowhere. So now when you turn left and right, this hose has the correct amount of flex between your caliper and its locking point as designed from the factory. Now the only thing left to do is put the bolt back into the knuckle, but now that shark fin tab that was originally there is going to be in the way, and we're going to show you how to move that out of the way so you could slide the bolt straight through and not have it interfere with the strut mechanism. Now that piece is there only to position this strut into the knuckle in a certain point. It serves no other purpose but just to slide the knuckle up onto the strut in one position and one position only. Last piece of this puzzle is this. This is the shark fin tab, and what this does is get in the way when you want to slide the bolt back through. So if you're looking in this area, you can see the top portion of the original hole where the bolt slid through. If you take a flathead screwdriver like so, you can actually put the flathead screwdriver into the hole like this. And as the instructions say on number 3, put it in there and just twist the tab towards the motor. Once you have enough of the hole exposed, you can ditch the small flathead and go to a bigger one and do it a lot easier, because now you can actually pry this piece out of the way . Just like so, making a gap for the bolt to slide through. Once it's out of the way, you leave it there. Now that we moved that tab out of the way, your new OEM hardware that we supply you can literally slide right through and not catching any interference from it. You're also going to use the new bolt nut combination. You don't want to reuse the old nut because the nylon on that is already compromised since it was already used, as well as the OEM bolt is a torque to yield, and they can only be used once as well. So we are going to get it set. Using the same tools we had before to take it off. 18mm on the impact, 11mm 12 point on the 6 lobe side. We're not gonna ugga-dugga it on. It's always a pain if you're not able to see what you're doing. We're going to get it tight and then torque it with our torque wrench. Still loose, but that's because it's hitting the nylon. Now it's tight. Nope, still got a little play. Perfect. You'll find that getting an impact in here works, but to an extent. Then you want to use your calibrated torque wrench, and we'll give you the specs on that as well in a second. Alright, so we're going to torque the spec. It's 88 foot-pounds of torque. So get in here and hold this guy on here tight. And this torque and tighten until you hear that click for 88 foot-pounds. This is nice and tight up against there. Any day now. Go. You got your 88 foot-pounds, factory spec torque setting. This guy's going to be tight, so give him a nice little whack with a mallet, or if you can, just wiggle it off. One side is done for your front. Now please note that when you want to go put your tire on, your tire and wheel are going to sit 2 inches lower than where it was before it sat. So you might have to jack up the side that you just worked on a little bit more, provided you're still using jack stands, and give it enough height to slide the factory tire back on. You can proceed with the same operations on the other side, and you'll see that in the video just quickly done. Now that we got the front taken care of, we're going to do the rear. And same straightforward application, same tools. There's a couple other tools that we're going to show you that you need. But first you want to make sure you loosen your wheel lock. Going to use your 19 millimeter on all the lug bolts. You might have to lift this up a little bit higher than the front. If that's the case, we're good. However, notice how this is coming right off while it's on the ground. Obviously, when this drops down, there's going to be more downward force, so this will have to be lifted up after you put the rear spacer on, because there's going to be too much pressure pushing down on the ground, so the wheel won't be able to go back on because the hub and everything will be sitting lower. Everything right here is going to be straightforward. You're going to want to use a second jack to do this technique. You're going to take your jack, position it under the lower control arm where it meets the knuckle, and put pressure upwards on the lower control arm. You'll then remove the bolt and nut that connects the lower control arm to the knuckle, and then slowly let down your jack, giving you the ability to remove this spring without having to use spring compressors. Alright, now that we got our floor jack, I'm just going to put enough pressure on the lower control arm just to give it a little bit of a lift. And just basically set it and forget it. We'll then remove that bolt and its nut, and those bolts can be reused. So we've got an 18 millimeter on the front and an 18 millimeter on the back. Just going to use a static breaker bar. Hold it against it. You might not have to use the extension. Perfect. So, since you have tension upwards on the lower control arm, when this bolt comes through, this won't want to fly out, neither will the spring. Taking your precautionary measures nice and slow so you don't damage any of the threads. You can now lower the lower control arm, just like so. It'll separate from the knuckle, and you'll have free movement of the spring. You're going to see right here that nothing is really happening, and that's because your lower control arm is still attached to your rear sway bar with the sway bar end links. So we're going to show you the tools necessary to remove that so this can free fall right out of the way. This is your sway bar end link connection to the lower control arm. This is going to be a 15 millimeter nut and this is a 3/16 Allen. So you're going to find that if you just go to loosen this, the Allen can spin. To keep that from spinning, you insert the 3/16 Allen with your open-ended. Just like so, and you'll be able to remove your sway bar end link. Once again, 15mm on your open-ended and 3/16 on your Allen. You can see that this is at a slight angle. So, we're going to put a little bit more pressure on the lower control arm so it's pointed straight and parallel with the ground. And we'll be able to knock it out of the way, or even just push it out with our fingers. There you go. That's pretty straight. Just like so. It's out of the way. And then when I lower this floor jack, it'll now freely come loose. Now, we can literally just push down on the lower control arm and remove the spring. That simple. Holdup was one of the coils was hitting the nut on the sway bar. You're basically going to take your factory spring, leave it as is, and just add our spacers to the bottom. On our spacers, you've got a hole here and a threaded portion down here. In the original design of the kit, we used a black set screw in the bottom to position this into the lower control arm so it couldn't spin. Because there is a hole in the lower control arm that the spring retainer matches to. So this hole locks into the lower control arm to keep the spring from spinning on and off of load. So we ditched the black set screw and went with a design that was more foolproof for the customer, because a lot of customers would say, how much thread do you want to have coming out of the bottom of your spacer? Because they'd be this long, they didn't know how long to keep it. So you get this new hardware, threads in from the top, and it bottoms out, allowing the correct amount of bolt and thread sticking out the bottom to ensure it locks in. You could use that 3/16 Allen as well to screw it down all the way until it hits the mechanical stop inside. No need to torque, just make sure. So you have the correct amount sticking out the bottom. And you're going to place this on your lower control arm, like so. Now that we have the bolt protruding with enough threads coming through, you can place this on your lower control arm until it gets locked in place. The next step is to take your spring assembly, and this little dimple that's right here is going to go into the hole at the top of the spacer. So this locks into the spacer, and then the spacer locks into the lower control arm. plastic spring retainer locked into spacer, spacer locked into the lower control arm. Now what we do is we put the jack back under here and slowly lift it up. And there's a technique that we want to show you to make sure that when you're lifting it up, this yoke right here marries to this without twisting this bushing out of the way. So this will actually slide up over this without any issues. And you'll be able to slide the bolt back through because this will be perfectly aligned. Now that we have the jack underneath the lower control arm, we're going to lift nice and easy with our feet on the jack to help position the lower control arm. In the meantime, you're going to want to make sure that this doesn't bind up on here. So, take note of where this is located and make sure it falls in the hole that is right here, so it could be back in perfect alignment when it comes time to install it. Now, as you can see, I'm using my feet to make sure that the lower control arm is in perfect alignment with that bushing. And as I'm lifting, you'll see if it lines up, because it'll move that bushing around if it hits it. So as you can see, it's touching it. But it was touching it on the back side because it moved, you were able to see it move on this side. So push it forward a little bit more so that that clearance works out perfect. As you can see, it did, just like that. So it looks like both holes are lined up perfectly. What we'll do is from the back side is get a screwdriver, position everything good so you can take that bolt and put it back through. If you need that long screwdriver, this would be the time to use it, because if it doesn't line up, you're going to want to use this to help position the knuckle. See how you can still move the knuckle around? So, get between the knuckle and the lower control arm, and enough to just slide it in. So now that you got that in, you're going to go about and look from the other side as you're wedging. And I like to use a mallet, a little rubber mallet, to just tap it in once you see it line up. And it's that simple. We'll torque these to spec, and we'll give you that setting in just a second. Alright, so we'll get back to this bolt. We're going to get it tight, and then we're going to torque it. Torque settings is 90 foot-pounds, so hang tight. Now that it's back on, a little bit of play. We're going to torque it to spec. Set your torque bar to 90 foot-pounds, which is only 2 more foot-pounds than the front. here for a while. There you go. Torque to spec, or the equivalent of 2 Ugga-Duggas. This side is done. We still need to reconnect the sway bar end link and move on to the other side. Want to make sure you can slide this right through. You might have to adjust the height of the lower control arm in case it doesn't go in nice and straight. I'm just going to seat this bad boy right against this. When it comes to tightening it, that's when you're going to need that 3/16 Allen key. Now, one thing to take note of, we just tighten this down, but there's flex on the inside because there is a ball joint that's greased. If after your whole installation and you do your test drive and you hear thumping noises from the rear, this is going to be where your problem is, because in case you didn't tighten this down with this perfectly parallel with the ground, there'll be a little bit of a angle to it. If there's an angle to it and then the suspension flexes up and down, that angle creates a little bit of a gap on the inside and allows this thing to move and flutter just a tiny bit. That will give you a little bit of noise after installation. So if you hear a noise, come back and tighten this bad boy up. So we've got everything reassembled, and we'll move on to the next side.